A grand jury will now hear the case against the man charged in the Chapman Highway crash that killed 22-year-old Pierce Corcoran. Police say Corcoran died when a pickup truck swerved into oncoming traffic and hit him head-on. He was the son of Knoxville Fire Department Captain D.J. Corcoran.
A police investigator, as well as the driver of one of the other cars involved in this crash, testified in court this afternoon. And 10 News reporter Mark Salinger joins us with more of what we learned today. Mark?
Robin and John, the judge decided the case will move on after hearing testimony and watching a video that captured the crash on surveillance footage. The grand jury will now decide if this case goes to trial. The state argues Francisco Eduardo Franco Cambrani swerved into oncoming traffic to avoid a slowing car when he hit Pierce Corcoran. They say he should have moved into an empty lane. Cambrani did not have proof of insurance or a driver's license, but did have an ID from Mexico. Defense attorney Mark Stevens says his client did not have time to react.
This was negligent. This was a car accident. And I dare say there's not a person in this courtroom that hasn't been in a situation where somebody has stopped in front of them or somebody has run out in front of them and they react.
Knoxville police officer Tim Edwards was the lead investigator in this case and played a key role in determining whether Cambrani should be charged with criminally negligent homicide. He says there were two cars traveling slowly or stopped, waiting to make a turn on Chapman Highway when Cambrani swerved into oncoming traffic to avoid them. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Russell made the case that Cambrani chose to swerve into oncoming traffic.
Individuals who drive those cars are given the responsibility of being responsible in those cars. And when you are driving down a road, as it was testified to today, with a speed limit of 45 miles an hour after dark, with a double yellow, with no turn lanes, in traffic, you have to be responsible. You have to know what is going on around you.
Now, this story has gained national attention as the debate over illegal immigration continues. Prosecutors say Cambrani is in the country illegally. Yesterday, Pierce Corcoran's family was in Washington, where they met with Vice President Mike Pence at the White House. Now, Cambrani's bond was revoked last week and remains revoked today. The state argues ICE could deport him if he is released from Knox County custody. Robin and John.
Mark Salinger with the story for us. Mark, thank you.
Kentucky State Police have now